progress. So this is the activity log. This is the sub log. I think I've explained them. The third log which I mentioned was the event log. And if I go to this page, so this is where we have the event log. Now event logs are, as I said, they capture the activity happening on the mainframes. So for example, if that opens, yeah, it's got open. So it will have the logs in a different, the logs will look a bit different here because these are not logs generated by gateway. This is the MTS layer that is generating the logs. But you can see, for example, in this particular case, I'm looking for logs for say customer retrieve transaction. Yeah. So what I can do, I can basically say the name of the transaction here. I think it generally starts with Casol. Luck today. Okay, we have something called membership retrieve. Let's do that one. So I'm looking for membership retrieve transaction. So again, if you type in membership retrieve, it will show you that there was certain transaction that fired for membership retrieve. And then again, it has got the timestamp. So if you're looking for a mainframe transaction that failed around this time, then obviously you can triangulate using the timestamp. Yeah. And then you can see that indeed is a call to membership retrieve here. And then you can see there is some log that has been put in here. The request was formed, the transaction was picked up, and there will be some logs that will indicate what has happened with this transaction and what data that you got as part of these transactions. Yeah. So if you even see that there's a problem with this transaction, these files will generally have something like membership retrieve failed, there was an MQ issue, there you would see something called MQ failed. So if you retrieve this file and you have captured the time around which the transaction failed, that will give enough evidence for the developer or for someone like the environment team. They can have a look at the log and can see what specifically has failed for the transaction. Yeah, or it might be also the case that the transaction is not retrieving any data for the test data that you're using. Then it might be down to whether you're using the right data, whether the data you're using is set up for that particular test bed. So that kind of indication you get when you see the event logs, but they're a bit more different than reading sublogs, and it gets a little bit used to when you read event logs. But like I said, starting point is look for the transaction name. If you know the transaction name, look for the transaction name, and that will give you some idea of what's happening in the logs, and you will see some things. So you can see the response. This is a typical response coming from the mainframe. It will say response fields, and just underneath the transaction, you will see this is the way that mainframe displays the logs or puts down the logs. Is a particular way defined, but you can see it has logged this. It has got a response coming from this transaction called xApi retrieve member, and the response is returning this data. Yeah, and you can use this as a evidence in your test whether the transaction is behaving like the way you want. So if it's not, then you know it's either a data issue or you know something is funny going on with the transaction. So you can go to the data team and you can basically ask that why this transaction is not getting me the data which I expect for this particular test run. Yeah, so that's what the co-event logs give you. Yeah, so if you know if it's a mainframe transaction issue, you can use the same patterns to extract the co-event logs and attach it to the defect. Yeah, so that's the event log. So 3 main logs I think I've covered: activity, sub, and event logs. I've used mostly Notepad++ to triangulate where I need to look the logs for and what the indications are and how I can use the logs activity to find out the sequence of operations, where the issue happened, sublogs to give more details of what happened inside the operation, and the event log to investigate if there is any cause with the if there is an issue with the mainframe transaction. Yeah. Okay. Very good. So that's how you do in a WAS environment. Now, as I said, I'll briefly visit how do you retrieve the logs from an AWS environment. But essentially, once you get the logs from an AWS environment, the method that you use to investigate is not different. You load up the files in Notepad++, you do the same searching that I performed, but it's essentially the same. The only difference is the method of how you download the logs from AWS environments. So there is a new page which I got created with the help from someone from the AWS team, which essentially tells how to retrieve logs from AWS. Sorry. So essentially in AWS, when we go, I think we term them as blue-green environments, or we denote them as a color with a particular account. So when you say SIT20 blue or SIT2 green, it essentially means SIT20 or SIT02 is the account in which the environment in green in which the environment is in, and the green part or the blue part tells you the slot of that AWS environment. So here, this page was newly added, so it's quite a helpful page. You will see what the colors represent which slots. You have got red, like 0, blue 1, green 2, and yellow 3. Yeah. So, for example, you're looking to get logs from SIT02 green environment. Yeah. So what you can do is basically here it tells you that in order to do this, you need to go to this page, which is basically a list of AWS test environments. You need to go into the DevOps accounts, and the environment that we are interested in is SIT02 green for this particular example. So let's go to SIT02. We are looking for the color green, which is this. Yeah. And once you have found out these two things, you are interested in two things now. You have gone to SIT02, you've gone to the right color. You want to access logs. So you need to have access to the ARO group. So this AD group, you will need access if you want to have access to the AWS logs. So first check whether you have access to this AD group. Yeah. The second thing it tells which account you need to visit to extract the logs out of AWS console. In this case, it's this number that you're looking for. Yeah. So once you have got access to the AD group, you need the number, which is this displayed on screen. Yeah. Now, how do I go and look for the logs under this account? You need to go to the AWS console, which is basically AWS/. You need to put in your client details. Yeah. Now it has opened up the AWS console, and I look for that particular account ID, and it gives me this result. What I'm interested in is launching the AWS console. So if I click on it, it would now try and open up the AWS console for that particular account. Yeah. The service which I'm interested in is CloudWatch. Yeah, I'm interested in CloudWatch. So I go into CloudWatch. And I want to go to Log Insights, this option. There you go. So now we have gone into AWS console, we have got into CloudWatch, and we're into the login sites for the account ID that we are trying to investigate. Now, we know that we are looking for slot 02 because this is the slot we are looking for, sit 02. So what we can do here is basically, since we know we are looking for slot 02, we need to basically triangulate by writing R2. Yeah, so basically the slot 2. And I need access to my sublogs, which are called app support, app log support, and I need activity logs. So I'll basically select them. Yeah, and I've not now got it in my filter results. By default, you will notice there is a limit. This is the limit on the log lines that will display. So 20 lines most probably will not give you much. So make sure you increase it. I think 10,000 is the limit. You can put it, so put it to maximum limit, and then you can put it the time. You can put the time, absolute time, when you want the logs for. Just bear in mind, there is a local, there's an option here. So this option wasn't present before. All it would provide you is the UTC time zone. So in summer times, what would happen is, if you're getting logs from gateway, then you're expecting the logs to happen at 9, suppose 9 a.m. Since it's UTC, during summertime, you would act, if in UTC, you will have to look for logs at 10. So you'll have to provide a time. Suppose you're looking at today's logs, and I need logs at 9:30. Yeah, because it was using UTC before, what you have to do is put the time as 10:30 here. Yeah, because there was a time difference between UTC and the local UK time. This used to happen. So recently, I think the AWS guys have put a fix in. So now when you try to retrieve the logs, you make sure that you select the local time zone. So this will pick up the actual time zone, the UK local time zone that you're looking at. Yeah, and you don't have to plus or to minus on the times during summertime. Yeah, so you can put the actual thing in here, 09:30. You're looking for logs between 09:30 and say 09:35. Apply them, run the query. I think there was no activity there at that point, but essentially this will fetch you all the logs for that particular time. So there was no activity during this time, possibly due to which it's not showing anything. But if you put the relevant time, it will now show you all the logs for that particular time zone. And then if you have gone through the KT session, like Ben said, you can triangulate like this. You can further triangulate the area you want, the time span you want the logs for. Once you've got the logs, there is an option that generally comes here where you get the download logs option. And it will essentially give you similar logs like these. Yeah, the sublogs and activity logs that I just explained. They'll be downloaded as CSV files, but they can be opened up. Again, this tool is very powerful, Notepad++. It will open up the CSV files as well for you. And you will see similar stuff that you see here. Yeah. So the method to navigate the logs after you extracted them doesn't change. Yeah, it's the same method. You need to look at the phone number. You need to triangulate on the AID based on the timestamp. You can get the sequence of the ops in the activity, and you can find out more on what has happened inside the operation using sublogs. Okay, so I'll send out a link to this newly created page. You can have access to it, and this will also essentially tell you how to retrieve the same set of logs from AWS. Okay, now I've spoken for I think around 50 minutes. I'll give myself a pause. Any questions?
Yeah, I've got one. Can you hear me?
Go on. Yeah, I can.
On your Notepad++, you use the formatting tool that I don't think we have access to. Can you remind me what it's called?
It's called JS tool. So it's a good thing that you asked. If you have the Notepad++, yeah, you might not have this tool by default. What you can do, go to plugins admin, yeah, and here just search for that. Yeah, can you see JSON viewer here? Yeah. So just select any tool that you want, and you'll see there are more tools here that you might be interested in. So just select that tool and just click on install.
Okay, I think it might be linked to some sort of privileges or admin rights to do that.
Yeah, you need admin rights for that to install it, I think.
Yeah, but it's a allowed tool. As I said, this is an allowed tool by Barclays. So you can raise a software request, you can get it installed on your PC, and you can also have the plugins. Absolutely, it's fine because I've installed some plugins of my own which I use from day-to-day basis. So you can pretty much get them. Yeah.
Cheers, man.
Yep.
Thanks, Gab. Any questions from anyone else?
Yeah, hi Ben, Gaurav here, Samanta. Just one question here. On the AWS log side, does it helps to basically filter the, for example, you filtered phone number, right? Does it really, is it useful like that? You can just filter those numbers here and instead of downloading the entire log.
Yes, you can. You can. I didn't expand on this because, like Ben mentioned, there was a separate session. But if you see this query thing here, you can actually filter on various things, and there is a page here on the AWS logs insight where I think we have provided various filters that you can use to actually triangulate the logs. And it can be many things, like you said, phone number. You can basically use these queries, and you can form up your own queries using these filters, and you can post it in the CloudWatch. It's just how you structure your query. Yeah. So there are some examples here. You can certainly go through them. But you can definitely do it. It was just an example when I said that how to extract logs. But you can, for example, just look at here. It's a very complex. So we have built up this query. We are looking for a particular log stream. We are looking for a particular message at a particular date and time and AID. And they're looking for something in very particular thing. So you can put very complex queries. So it will give you very, very exact logs, at the time that you're looking for. And because Cloud Insights is very powerful here, you can do all that stuff here. But on WAS, we don't have anything. So we basically rely on Notepad++ to do these kind of things,
Okay, thank you.
Sorry?
And you can just share these pages. I think.
I'll do that. I promise Ben that. Yeah, I'll do that after the session. Yeah, I'll share all the relevant pages. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Didn't you say there was something you could show us on xApi as well, Samanta?
I can, if everybody is okay, and I think I have kind of gone beyond the time.
Squeeze it in. Could always set it up for next week if you're free.
No, I can do it now.
Very good documentations as well. I mean, someone like the one you shared in the email. We have got quite few good documentations. I mean, I have got few good documentations on API logs.
Yes, we have some good documentation. But as Ben said, let's do a very quick, if everybody is okay, let's do a quick walkthrough of the xApi logs. So let me show you. And I'm hoping this opens up.
It was
yeah. Right. So essentially, when you look for logs, you're looking for logs for Experience API. the one thing that you need to make sure is you're looking at the right pod. Yeah. So let's take one example here. I think we saw a call to homepage API somewhere here, which was throwing a lot of quad 02s. It's a bit worrisome. Right. Yeah. So let's take this for an example. So here you can see for this particular AID and this particular number, the SPRO01 call was made, which, as we all know, calls experience APIs. In this particular case, it called an API named BNB Domain Registration API. Yeah, and you can see that from the URL. You can see the path that it tried to call on that API and the actual host that it tried to connect for this API. So this is, if you see the URL, if you closely monitor the URL, you will see this is the pod 18883. This is the cluster, NP4 cluster. This is the name of the API, and this is the version of the API that was called. Yeah. So I need to look at the 18883 logs for the NP4 cluster. So what I have here is I've got the log URL for 18883 for the NP4 cluster. And you'll have similar URLs for other pods like 18884. It can be some other pod. But basically, I think most of the APIs are currently deploying on 18883, if I'm not wrong, in SIT environments. So this is the most one which is predominantly gets used, the 18883 NP4 environment. Inside that, once you've got into this URL, so it's a log viewer URL, you go into this directory called logs SPVC. We, as a digital team, we are TC14. So the directory that I am interested in is the service mesh TC14 directory. So once I go into that, this will catalog all the APIs, experience APIs that have been deployed on 18883 NP4 cluster. Yeah. And from my activity logs, I can see I'm interested in BNB Domain Registration API. So I go in here, I look for the API, and voila, there is the API. I go into this folder, then I am interested in 5.2-1.9. So if you will see, those stand for the first 4 bits of these numbers. So if you see, this is the one that I'm looking at, 5019. This is the unique identifier of the deployed pod at that particular time. So you can ignore this bit. This is the first 4 bits should match up to your API version. So we are looking at 5.0-1.9. So that's 5.0-1-9. So I go into this. Now you will see files which are similar to that we find in Gateway. We have something called activity logs. We have something called app logs. For now, you can ignore the co-event logs because APIs traditionally, they haven't been connecting to any mainframe. They call ODS APIs. So we don't log anything. We don't use MTS libraries in our experience API. So nothing gets logged in the co-event log. 99% of the logs get cataloged in either co-activity or co-app logs. So like the name suggests, co-activity logs basically display the request response coming in and out of the APIs. Yeah, so you'll have something, instead of having in and outs, you will see something called request and response here. So you will have request coming in and you will see responses going back. Yeah, so the essential thing is, if you want to have a look at what happened for this particular API when it was called from Gateway, the thing which links these two up is the correlation ID. Yeah, and you will see this in the activity logs of the API. You will also see this in the activity logs of the Gateway. So if I'll go into the activity logs, so it says it tried to call this API registration at this XYZ time, and you will see there is something here called, am I going blind where it is? There you go.
CID2.
Yeah, you're right. CID 2. So this is the one. This is the correlation ID which gets passed on to this API. Yeah, it's absolutely critical. Every experience API gets passed on this correlation ID. So you can basically triangulate this correlation ID. You can go into the co-activity log and you can look for the time where it was called. You look for the similar time here. They follow both the API logs also follow the local time, so there shouldn't be any time difference. All you would need to do is search for this correlation ID, and as you can see, it is showing something for this correlation ID at this particular time. Yeah, and this is the response that happened here that this API sent back. So this will actually match up to what you can see here. So if the API responded with an error, so you will see that the API actually responded with an error here in the response. Yeah, you can see if you I'm not sure if it's very visible, but if you can see at this part, the payload was an error. There was an internal server error that happened with this API around this time. So this does match up to what the activity logs in gateway is saying. Yeah. Now, again, this tells you what is coming out of the API. What is coming into the API is just before this, where the request part is there. If you want to know what has happened with that API, then you need to go into the CoApp logs. This is the CoSup equivalent of the API logs. Yeah. Bear in mind, this log viewer behaves in a very weird way. Sometimes your log download will fail. All you need to do is just click on refresh a couple of times and then quickly download the logs, and it happens. Don't ask me why. It has been like this for quite some time. When you go inside this, use your correlation ID, and then you can see stuff which is happening for this in this API around this time. So you can now try and navigate the logs, see what is failing. It will possibly at some point show you the same error. So that it says exception occurred. You can see there was an exception which explains why that API failed around that time. And then there will be something which will be basically saying that there was some null pointer exception or whatever. If it's not very clear what that exception is, from this, even I can't understand what's happening, then it would make sense to attach it to your defect, and the developer can have a look at what is happening in the code. But it can be a very straightforward thing which might say that it was trying to call another API and it got a socket timeout. So you really don't need the developer telling you why the API failed. You can actually see in this that the call to that API failed. So you know the API has failed. All you need is the point of contact from that API who represents that API, which the developer can help with, and they can help you put in, or they can raise it to the right people who can explain why that API was down. But essentially, this log will tell you, whatever the failure was. Yeah, but the way you navigate the logs, so the one thing which is important is the correlation ID, because that's what connects the gateway logs, the gateway traffic and the API traffic. Yeah, and that's also used in live as well. Mobam also uses the correlation ID to connect the gateway and to navigate the gateway and the xApi logs.
Do we need any specific access? AD group access, anything like that to get on this, or is it just a matter of hitting the
I don't think so, Ben.
It's available for everyone.
Yeah.
Also,
nice.
Yeah, it's accessible to everyone.
There you go.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Only thing I'll add, Sumant, is if you go to that URL that you selected TC14, like co-activity log doesn't show which data center it is on, like it is on GL or SL. So you can possibly check, or you can check from your developer, because in SID, we usually deploy in GL or SL. We usually don't deploy to both the data centers. OAuth onwards, we deploy in both, but on SID, we just deploy GL or SL.
Yeah, fair point, Komal. So for every of these pods, we generally have two data centers, Gloucester and Slough. In live, in OAT, we deploy our APIs to both the data centers. So you'll have a URL which will go to the Gloucester NP4 cluster, and you'll have a similar URL which will go to the Slough data center. Yeah, and the basically the folder structure is basically the same. You've got the logs SVC, the same TC14, but you are going to this another data center, Slough. In SIT, like Komal said, we generally deploy to one data center because we don't want that load balancing thing here. We just want our APIs to be deployed on one data center. But you will need some information from the developer or the feature team to know whether the API that you're interested, whether it's deployed on Gloucester or on Slough. So if the API is deployed to Slough, you need to just change that G to S here for that particular, and this will take you to the logs directory for the Slough cluster. And if you want to go to the Gloucester data center, or to replace it G, and it will take you to the Gloucester data center.
Yeah, there are dev tools actually we can use to know which capacity is assigned for SIT, but I mean, that will a step ahead. If the testers can get at least this done, we can maybe discuss it in further sessions. We have the service mesh dev tools. You can mention the API name, version, and it will tell you on SIT whether the capacity is assigned on GL or SL.
Excellent.
And only just one more thing to add. If you go on TC14, if you take the homepage example, like if you have multiple pods, right, if you do a redeployment, so you can just modify and check the latest pod by the last modified date. Yeah, so if you see 3.2-1.9, it could have multiple pods running. Like for 3.4-1.9, you have multiple one running, so you can just filter them by last modified date. That will give you the latest one running.
So in this case, the last modified was this one, which is the latest one. Yeah, so we need to go into this one.
Nice, good shout. Thank you. Cool. Well, I'm conscious we've gone over time by a fair bit. So unless anybody's got any burning questions, what I'd probably suggest is if Samanta, you could just send me over those links that you've gone through today, and I'll add them to the drop-in pages. Encourage everybody to use them, and then